again.
By such false accusation.
Victor, let me try again. I'm not talking about what's happening in the U.S. I am talking about what is happening in China. I am talking about the personal accounts from people who, you could see the signs that people are holding up at McDonald's, basically telling black people, you can't come here. This is real. That is not the United States. I don't want to hear about the United States. I really am asking you, can you deny this? You really can't.
No, first of all, China is still in the middle of this fight against coronavirus.
That is true.
Lots of things have changed. We are not in a normal situation. We have massive amount of quarantine, lockdown, constant taking of temperatures, constant checking of your IDs, your passports, for example. But all this has a purpose. That is to cut off the spread of the coronavirus. And anyone should abide by the rules and the regulations. Many of them are very alienating. Some of them are very intrusive into privacy, as we normally understand. And I would say everyone, Chinese or non-Chinese, Asians, Americans, Europeans, Africans, etc. In this fight against coronavirus, we are all in the same boat. So let's listen to what the government authorities have to say. Let's always carry our ID card. Let's always be willing to have our temperatures taken. And if they want to take our testing, to the testing, because you are doing this not only for your own good, you are doing this for the good of the whole community.
Okay, Victor.
So I would urge everyone in China to abide by the rules and regulations.
Your point is well taken. Absolutely. China is really in a fight right now to make sure that this doesn't come back. And it is a very intrusive situation for a lot of people all over the world, and obviously particularly in China. So I don't think anyone would have a quibble with what you're saying. It just seems that perhaps there's an extra level of measures that are happening to other people. Actually, I'm going to go to Keith now, Victor. I'll come back to you in a moment. Keith, so what Victor is saying, yes, it's absolutely true. We're in a pandemic. Things are going to be a little different now. But it is clear that it seems certain people are being targeted for an extra level of scrutiny. Is that how you see this?
It's absolutely how I see that. And with respect, Victor, what I'm seeing here is that China made a decision. Xi Jinping made a decision that this was contained around late March. It was contained in China. And after that, you started seeing no provinces reporting that many new cases, but they claimed that all the new cases of this virus were so-called imported cases. Now, let's unpack that a little bit. These so-called imported cases are actually Chinese citizens returning to China from abroad. But the way it's been interpreted by many people is that these are foreigners bringing in the disease. And so therefore, foreign diplomats have been told not to come to Beijing. Foreigners in Beijing have been under an increased level of scrutiny, and foreigners, particularly in Guangzhou, and especially African foreigners, have been subjected to this higher level of scrutiny, suspicion, anger, and discrimination in Guangzhou. There was indeed a case where I think several Nigerians went outside of quarantine, went to a restaurant and infected people. Since that happened in Guangzhou, there has been widespread discrimination.
I think
in restaurants, they've been kicked out of their apartments.
Keith, just a moment. We had a bit of a technical issue, but Gabriella also wanted to get in, so just stand by. Go ahead, Gabriella.
Okay, I want to add on what he said. 80% of the imported new cases were because of the Chinese that came in, but also the other 20% was from the foreigners. So we can't really totally rule out that the foreigners didn't contribute to the imported cases. So it all went down like the foreigners were being tested for corona as well. So it's not only the Chinese that brought the new cases, but also the foreigners.
Gabriella,
and that's why they were being tested. That's the point.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. No, Gabriella, I wanted to ask you, what is it like just as a Black woman living in Wuhan, even before all this happened? Just what does your day-to-day life feel like to you?
Honestly, you always feel like a stranger because you're looked at weird when you get on the subway. No one wants to sit next to you, or someone will cover their nose. So you always, but you get used to it. But it's strange. It's a strange feeling. You can't get used to it. It's not home. But the way it's going down now, being discriminated right now, it feels worse than it was before. So as a Black woman,
No, go ahead.
and they don't really, it's like they do it knowingly, you know.
So, Keith, I want to ask about that, the feeling that Gabriela is describing. So often people, something that a government is doing gets attributed to the people. It's not always the same thing. You know, there's things that the Chinese government can do that isn't necessarily what you feel from Chinese people, like out in the community, or Asian people, depending on what country you're in. What has your experience been, Keith? It's not all the same.
It's not all the same. My experience is that on the official level that Victor is talking about, China wants to have good relationships with Africa, with African countries. This goes all the way back to Mao Zedong, who wanted to have fraternal relations with African countries. China today, modern China, is investing a lot in Africa. They built the African Union headquarters. They're building soccer stadiums. They built the road from Nairobi to Mombasa. They're doing a lot.
They're also sending masks and medical equipment there.
They're sending masks and medical equipment. So on an official level, China has great relations with Africa. They want good relations with Africa. On a person-to-person level, a lot of Chinese, many, I'm not saying 100%, but many still discriminate against Africans. They see Africans as inferior. If a black person like myself, who's from the United States and speaks English, wants to go teach English in China, we would be turned away because we're not white. They think an English teacher should be white. They're discriminated against in many different ways. African students are discriminated against. They talk about it. Africans in general are seen as criminals. I've gone to Guangzhou, to the area that they call Little Africa or Chocolate City. Africans have told me that they're constantly stopped and harassed for their ID and for their passports. It's very hard for them to rent places. So on a person-to-person level, there is a lot of discrimination. When you bring this topic up to Chinese officials, I'm afraid, and I'm sorry, Victor, but the answer is always, yes, but you have discrimination in the United States too. So it's always kind of a whataboutism. What about your discrimination against the blacks in the United States? It's always that answer without addressing the fact that, for example, they had a New Year's Eve presentation a couple of years ago for New Year's Eve where they did skits with Chinese wearing blackface and dressed as animals and dressed as monkeys. And they put this on the air on CCTV, and they thought this was okay. So they have a kind of an unconscious discrimination when they don't realize it.
Victor, I want to bring you back in the conversation, and your point is well taken. Yes, there is racism in the U.S., and unfortunately, something that is happening now is that many Asian Americans are being targeted because of their ignorance about COVID-19, and that's an awful thing, and it absolutely should not be happening. However, the fact that there seems to be, at least, and we were hearing it from Gabriela and Keith, there is the same type of, at least some level of discrimination happening in China too. How can you not acknowledge that?
No, first of all, in the Chinese history, there has been never any institutionalized discrimination based on color. That's very, very important. And this sets China apart from many other countries which have institutionalized injustices based on color. Secondly, I disagree with the other panelists. I think China is a big country. We have 1.4 billion people. Of course, different people have different opinions, of course, but I think China as a whole condemns discrimination of all kinds, especially discrimination based on racial discrimination based on color. And in China,
so let me ask, hold on.
People around me, we do not distinguish people based on their color.
Okay,
I think color is an important part of human being, and they should all be respected.
Victor, everybody sees color, so let's just put that to the side. But let me ask you this. If you're saying that perhaps this is happening, but you're saying that this is not something that is institutionalized, that if that's the case and the Chinese government isn't okay with it, why don't they put their foot down to make it clear that this is not acceptable and actually do something about it?
No, I think China is one of the best countries in the world in terms of respecting Africans, for example, or people of color from all parts of the world, both as a government, as a society at large, and on a person-to-person basis. I commingle with lots of Africans, actually, in Beijing. Some of them work for CRI, the radio station. Some of them work at CGTN. We are very proud of our personal relations, and I do treat them and they treat me as brothers and sisters. And I think I'm very typical of people in China who do see these people as equals, rather than, for example, having this false sense of superiority or inferiority. I think people of all colors, we are equal under God.
Keith, the people that are experiencing this, and Victor makes a good point. Obviously, China is a very populous country. We're not trying to say that everybody is this way. Absolutely not. But these people's experiences are real. So for people that are experiencing this, what options, what recourse do they have?
Look, very little. Look, when the virus struck in Wuhan, when people like Gabrielle were stuck there from Uganda, America took in planes to take their nationals out. Other countries chartered planes to take their nationals out. A lot of African countries, many of them poorer, did not charter planes to take their nationals out, and so they were kind of stuck there. And so they didn't really have a whole lot of recourse. A lot of them, I don't know about Gabrielle's situation, but a lot of students went there because they were given scholarships or they were invited in by the Chinese government. They were invited in to learn Chinese or to learn other skills. But when push came to shove, and I'm afraid this has happened in the United States as well, xenophobia has come to the top. This virus has caused a spate of xenophobia around the world, whether it's Thailand, the United States, Europe. People are closing borders and looking at other people with suspicion. Even Australia has closed its borders, saying we don't want any outsiders coming in. Chinese are reacting kind of the same way, except they've got this huge population of Africans living in Guangzhou who are now being looked at with suspicion. They're being looked at as virus carriers. They're being looked at as someone to be avoided because they might not be as clean. They might not be following the same rules as we are. And so they're someone to be avoided. And yes, that is happening in the United States against Asians, not only Chinese. All Asians are being discriminated against. But we're seeing xenophobia popping up everywhere, I'm afraid, because of this virus. Borders are closing.
Do you think that this could have, and you talked about China has a big footprint in Africa, and we've outlined that. Do you think that this has the potential to have to sour diplomatic relations in any way, or is China's footprint just too big?
I think it will sour diplomatic relations. I think, look, there's a huge population of Chinese in Africa. As this story gets out there and gets legs, seeing how Africans are being treated in China, you might see a backlash against many of those hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Chinese living in Africa. There has already been a lot of backlash against Chinese in Africa. A lot of Africans are starting to say that China's big economic footprint in China is benefiting China more than it's benefiting Africa. A lot of countries are going into a lot of debt to pay for some of these big projects. The Mombasa to Nairobi Railroad, for example, could end up putting Kenya into a lot of debt that they can't afford. A lot of these countries are starting to say, hold on a second, we're not getting the jobs from these projects because they're employing Chinese to come over and do the job. So there's been a lot of criticism of China's footprint in Africa. And then when Africans start seeing how Africans are being treated in China, yes, you could have a very big backlash. This could set back China's Africa policy by many years.
Victor, your thoughts on that?
No, I don't think so. I think let's face the realities. We are all in this fight against coronavirus, and the coronavirus does not discriminate against races or countries or ethnicities. So this is the common lesson we all need to bear in mind. Let's get united to fight against the coronavirus, and let's abide by the rules of every government, every country as they are, because the strength of any defense line is actually determined by the weakest point. So if you have exceptions, for example, if you allow any group of people to disobey the rules and regulations, then the whole line of defense collapses. You have to look at the overall majority's interest. So I would not care whether it is Americans, Europeans, Japanese, Asians, for example, or Chinese, for example, they all need to abide by the rules. And if you hear the horrible stories which have happened to many overseas Chinese coming back because they do not abide by the rules, they are kicked out of the country straight away. They are Australians, they are other country citizens, etc. They are not black people, they are not African people. So that's one point I want to make. The second point is that what China has been doing in Africa is definitely for the good and the benefit of the African people. Let's continue to do this. Let every country involved, Americans or European countries, if they want to do the same as what China has been doing, the beneficiary will be the Africans.
Okay.
More roads are needed in Africa rather than less roads.
Okay.
That's the key point.
Victor, Gabriela has been wanting to get in on this point. Go ahead, Gabriela.
Yeah, you're saying what they're doing to the Africans is what should be done by every country. But according to what I know, most of the Africans went in for quarantine for 14 days. And when the 14 days were over, they gave them another 14 days. And they didn't do this for all.
等一下，我要买货。
没有 ，no，
我要买货。
说嘞。
你不交现金？
老板不在。
老板在哪里？你叫他。
在那边。
OK， 你出来，你跟他说我要买货。如果人是病毒，你们中国人是病毒，1月、2月我们都在关注了，听我说呀。
哎，麻烦了。
你叫老板过来。
老板在那边，我去叫老板。
好，你过来，我们一起去。我陪你跟你一起走。
老板不在呀！哎呀 ，no。
老板在哪里？
我不知道。
他去哪里？我要买货。
所以说我们是在这个交流上面的。You're not allowed to go in?
Well, I can go in. You said, yeah, give it to me. I can go in and they cannot.
这个是我。
Come on, they can. Right? Okay, Turkey. Oh my God, this is ridiculous. I'm sorry, I cannot help you. Really. Oh my God.